Have you ever wondered how often your eyes might be lying to you? Well, today's case will prove that not everything is as it seems. Before we begin, tell me, are you subscribed to the channel yet? If not, take advantage now. Like it, and leave your opinion in the comments. This will help spread this investigation to more people who love mysteries like you. The enigma of the inverted footprints isn't just a detective story. It's a living paradox, a challenge to logic. Imagine walking into a crime scene where the evidence says exactly the opposite of what it should. It seems absurd, doesn't it? Because this was exactly the mind game played by a killer obsessed with deceiving everyone. And here's a provocation. What if I told you that oftentimes our lives are also full of inverted paths? Situations that seem to lead us in one direction, but in fact hide a completely different path. The truth, as in this crime, rarely lies on the surface. Get ready, because what I'm about to reveal today isn't just a whodunit, it's a lesson in illusion, logic, and survival in a world full of distractions. And I guarantee, when we're done, you'll never look at a simple trail the same way again. I remember it as if it were yesterday. That isolated house, high on the hill, seemed like a scene from a poorly written nightmare. But there was something there no one dared question. The body lying on the frozen ground. People talked in whispers, as if the very air were charged with mystery. And yet for me, it wasn't just another case. I'd seen strange things before, but nothing as paradoxical as those inverted footprints. As the police officers photographed the scene, I approached the marks on the ground. The silence was broken only by the metallic sound of the camera capturing every detail. But something nagged at me. How could someone leave without first entering? It's like watching a movie that starts at the end, without ever showing the beginning. I knew I was facing a carefully constructed puzzle, almost as if someone had prepared a logic puzzle just to challenge me. From all the cases I've worked on, I've learned that first impressions can be deceiving. Sometimes the solution isn't in what we see, but in what we ignore because we think it's too obvious. That's what those footprints screamed at me. Don't trust what appears to be. And mind you, this isn't just advice for criminal investigations. In life, how often do we judge a situation by its surface, failing to realize that the truth is upside down right before our eyes? I bent down to examine them more closely and realized the marks were too perfect, symmetrical to the point of coldness. This wasn't a coincidence. With every inch, the feeling of being manipulated grew. Whoever had left those footprints wasn't just trying to hide. They wanted to provoke me, to trigger my instincts. And when a criminal plays riddles, believe me, the game has barely begun. The more I observed those marks, the clearer it became that these were no ordinary footprints. They were arranged as if someone had walked calmly outside, each step measured and calculated. But there was something very wrong with all of this. There were no entrance footprints. It was as if the victim had received a phantom visit. Someone who appeared out of nowhere and simply disappeared through the front door. I confess that this affected me, because I had seen clever criminals before, but not illusionists. I looked around and realized how staged the scene seemed. Everything was too quiet, too organized, as if the killer had set the stage for a specific audience. Me. It was like those puzzles that don't come with all the pieces, but still make us believe the picture is complete. The irony is that in life we often encounter situations like this. We believe we see the whole, but we don't see what's been left out. My mind began to race on two fronts. On one side, logic. Who would walk with inverted soles or create fake tracks? On the other, psychology. What would motivate someone to stage something so elaborate? Typically, criminals want to disappear quickly, but this one wanted to be noticed. That said a lot about him. In fact, it reminded me of those people who insist on being remembered for their tricks, even at the cost of their freedom. I moved closer to the door, examining the floor as if reading a book in an ancient language. There lay the first paradox of the case, a trail that led outside but hid the true starting point. It was a clear invitation to delve deeper, to refuse easy answers. And I knew that, behind the perfection of those marks, there was an even more ingenious trick waiting to be uncovered. As I surveyed the scene, a memory came to mind. Old 19th century investigative reports, cases nearly forgotten in the dusty archives of Scotland Yard. Criminals of that era already employed ingenious tricks, and one of them was precisely this: inverting the soles of their shoes to confuse the police. Just imagine, Men and women without technology, but with enough creativity to transform a simple shoe into a mind trap. Back then, crime was almost an intellectual contest. The thief prided himself on being more cunning than the investigator, and each inverted footprint was a provocation. A let's see if you can catch me. This has always fascinated me because it shows how logic is a powerful weapon both for good and for evil. And deep down, it's no different today. Instead of footprints, we have digital trails, clever frauds, schemes so well planned they fool even the most attentive. I remember studying the case of a killer who left false footprints leading to the river while actually hiding in the town barn. It took weeks to catch him, because everyone was convinced he had drowned. It was a valuable lesson. Never trust two linear tracks. Whenever the path seems obvious, it's usually because someone worked hard to make it that way. Thinking about these precedents helped me understand that what I had before me wasn't just a crime but a game. Someone had decided to resurrect old techniques and adapt them to the present, as if mixing history with cruelty. It was as if the killer were saying, "You're not the first to fall for this trick, and perhaps you won't be the last." And I, of course, couldn't let that happen. As soon as I arrived at the scene, the local police had already drawn their conclusions. To them, it was simple. Someone entered, killed the victim, and calmly left, leaving marks on the ground. It seemed too obvious, and perhaps that's why most settled for this explanation. But I learned that rushing to conclusions is the enemy of truth. Investigations aren't sprints, but silent marathons, where every overlooked detail can be the key to everything. While the agents argued among themselves, I remained silent, observing. It didn't take long to notice what they hadn't. The footprints were backward. The heel, which should have been pointing inward, was facing outward. It was a grotesque, almost glaring error, but one that went unnoticed precisely because it was right there in front of everyone's eyes. This is one of life's ironies. Often what's obvious is precisely what's most hidden. I decided not to immediately reveal my suspicion. I preferred to listen, let them speak, let them reinforce their theory. It's curious how, in any group, there's always someone who clings to the first hypothesis, just to appear confident. However, confidence without analysis is a dangerous illusion. How many of us have accepted a ready-made truth because it seemed logical, only to discover later that we had been deceived by the obvious? I knew this was no ordinary crime. If someone had gone to the trouble of reversing footprints, it was because they wanted to manipulate minds, not just escape. This realization changed everything. Suddenly, it wasn't about tracking footsteps anymore, but about understanding the reasoning behind those who created them. And that's when I realized the mind game was just beginning. I slowly lowered myself, my eyes almost level with the ground. There, before me, was the key piece that dismantled any simplistic theory. The heel of the footprints was forward, and the toe was backward. It was impossible for anyone to walk like that naturally. And believe me, I've seen people try to imitate steps in absurd ways, even walking backward across entire streets. But nothing came close to the perfection I observed there. The most intriguing thing was the regularity. Each footprint had the same pressure, the same alignment. There was no hesitation, no stumble, no irregularity. This wasn't improvisation, but planning. When I see something so meticulous, I know I'm dealing with someone obsessed. Ordinary people leave flawed tracks, but calculating minds transform even the ground into a dark work of art. And that in itself told me a lot about the mind I was confronting. This seemingly technical physical detail actually carries a powerful lesson. What seems right isn't always true. How many times have we followed paths that seem correct, only to discover we were upside down the whole time? The heel-to-toe position reminded me of exactly that. An illusion designed to fool unsuspecting eyes. And if it worked with trained police officers, imagine how effective it is in our everyday lives. As I reflected on this, I realized those footprints were not just a trick, but a message. Someone was telling me, see if you can notice what others don't. I felt, almost instinctively, that every physical detail hid a larger narrative, and if I followed this logic to its conclusion, I'd find something even more disturbing. The more I looked at that house, the more I felt something wasn't right. The doors were intact, the windows were sealed from the inside, no locks were forced. It was as if the house itself had conspired to imprison the secret within the body. And yet, the victim lay there, lifeless, like an open book without an author. The inevitable question echoed in my mind. If no one entered, how could anyone have committed the crime? These situations always remind me of so-called locked room riddles. Those literary mysteries that seemed impossible to solve but hid ingenious tricks. In real life, these enigmas are even more frightening because we're not dealing with fiction, but with the cruel ingenuity of a real-life killer. I faced criminals before who manipulated locks and created false passages. But here was something different. A direct provocation. What intrigued me most was the absolute silence of the surrounding objects. No broken glass, overturned furniture, or signs of a struggle. Everything seemed normal, except for the one detail that screamed a life had been ripped away within. It made me think about how, often, life's greatest mystery lies not in chaos, but in the order that makes no sense. Sometimes when everything seems intact, that's when we should be suspicious. I knew that to move forward I had to accept impossibility as part of the game. There was no logic in seeking obvious answers. The killer wanted me to believe in something unattainable, like magic. But magic doesn't exist. Tricks do. And with each passing second, I became more certain that behind this impossibility lay an even more ingenious secret waiting to be revealed. I always say that crime at its core is not just an act of violence, but also a form of communication. And in this case, the killer spoke loud and clear through the inverted footprints. He didn't just want to escape. He wanted to be noticed, almost applauded for his own boldness. This type of behavior reveals something very specific, a deep-rooted narcissism, typical of those who believe they are smarter than everyone around them. Throughout my career, I've encountered criminals who couldn't bear the thought of being forgotten. They weren't just seeking money or revenge. They were seeking recognition as if crime were a twisted art form. And here was no different. The scene was set up like a spectacle, and I was the main audience. It was as if he were saying, "See if you can keep up with me, Spencer." And that ironically already betrayed him. Criminal narcissism is like a reflection of something we also see in everyday life. How many people do you know who make a point of showcasing their achievements, exaggerating their accomplishments, and leaving inverted footprints just to appear bigger than they are? Deep down, it's the same pattern. A desperate need for validation, to prove they're always one step ahead of others. Only in the killer's case, the consequences were fatal. I knew that if I wanted to get close to this man, or woman, I would need to understand their mind. It wasn't enough to follow footprints. I had to follow vanity, the desire to be seen, the hunger for superiority. Criminals like this always make the same mistake. They leave their psychological signatures scattered along the way. And with each new clue, I was certain I was about to find another piece of this psychological puzzle. In the stuffy room where the experts gathered, discussion raged. Some claimed, almost arrogantly, that the footprints were nothing more than an illusion created by the wet snow, distorting shapes and confusing tired eyes. For them, the mystery ended there, but inside me something screamed otherwise. I had seen snow, mud, and dust shape strange tracks before, but never with such perfection. This was intentional, not a mere whim of nature. As the arguments went back and forth, I remained silent, analyzing. I had learned early on that in investigations, controversy is inevitable. There will always be those who prefer easy explanations because they alleviate the burden of uncertainty. But it is precisely at this point that many mistakes arise. The danger lies not in what we don't know, but in what we believe we know for sure. And believe me, premature certainties have ruined more cases than false leads. This divergence made me reflect on how we approach life. How often, when faced with a problem, do we settle for the simplest justification without daring to investigate further? It must be a coincidence, we say, or even it's no big deal. But the truth is that often, the surface hides sophisticated engineering, ready to mislead those who don't look closely. That was precisely the trap I saw in those footprints. So even with pressure from the team to end the discussion, I pressed on. I couldn't accept that it all boiled down to an illusion. Instinct, combined with logic, told me there was more behind this apparent simplicity. And if I was right, proof would soon emerge that would dismantle the skeptic's theory and pave the way for something far more disturbing. My eyes fell on a detail many overlooked: a broken glass on the floor next to the table. At first glance, it looked like a fight scene, as if the victim had tried to fight back and knock the object over. But something wasn't right. If there had been a struggle, why wasn't there any blood splattered? No stains on the walls, nothing on the furniture, no splashes outside the body. The glass lay there like a poorly cast actor in a play that wasn't his. I lifted the larger fragment and noticed no traces of blood or visible fingerprints. It was utterly strange. It was as if the object had been placed there simply to tell a story that never happened. I'd seen this trick before. Criminals who fabricate scenarios invent visual versions to confuse the observer's mind. A silent theater designed to quickly convince those who dare not question. This detail made me think about how much in our own lives we also buy into false stories. How often do we look at a scene, whether at work, in relationships, or even in the news, and accept the fabricated narrative without questioning the lack of evidence? It's easy to believe what's right in front of us. It's difficult to see what's missing. And that's exactly what caught my attention. It wasn't what was there, but what was missing. As I fitted the glass fragments together like puzzle pieces, my mind whispered, "Nothing is out of place by accident." And if that object didn't belong in the scene, someone had placed it there on purpose. The big question was, which one? This question, I knew, would lead me to an even deeper detail of the plot. It was when I bent down again, almost pressing my face to the ground, that the truth began to reveal itself. The marks didn't belong to an ordinary shoe. The contours were too rough in some places, and meticulously polished in others, as if someone had shaped the sole by hand. It was a craftsmanship, purposefully inverted. And this realization made me smile, not with satisfaction, but with respect for the enemy I was facing. Someone creative enough to turn a simple shoe into a mental trap. I ran my hand along the edge of the mark, trying to feel the texture left by the sole. I remembered past cases where criminals improvised objects to create illusions, but never anything so well calculated. Whoever did it had time, patience, and above all, an almost artistic vanity. This detail was more than technical. It was psychological. It was the invisible signature of someone who wasn't content with just killing. They needed to stage it. At that moment, I realized something that also applies to life outside of investigation. Often, the greatest tricks are found in the simplest things. It doesn't take a grand disguise or a sophisticated plan to deceive someone. Just turn the obvious around and trust that no one will look twice. How often, in our daily lives, do we accept ready-made truths because they seem to have the correct form, without realizing that they were molded only to appear convincing? As I watched, I felt myself getting closer and closer to the killer's thoughts. He wanted to challenge me, to test my ability to notice the hidden detail. And I knew, if he had reversed the soles, it was because he had more tricks up his sleeve. The key to the puzzle lay in the footprints, but the door it opened was still locked, waiting to reveal even deeper secrets. I've always believed that mathematics is the secret language of investigations. It doesn't lie, it doesn't distort, it doesn't allow itself to be manipulated by emotions. Measuring the distance between the footprints, I realized there was a rhythmic pattern, a cadence that only someone of a certain weight could maintain. Each mark on the ground was like an equation etched into the surface, and the solution pointed to something revealing: the suspect was lighter than the victim. This simple observation eliminated some names from the list. It couldn't be the robust neighbor everyone suspected, nor even one of the victim's stronger relatives. The trail led me to someone more agile, perhaps younger, with steps calculated to not only deceive visually, but also move with precision. It was fascinating to see how the human body betrays its owner down to the most subtle details. This moment made me reflect on how, in our own lives, we leave mathematical trails wherever we go. Our habits, our choices, even the cadence with which we live reveal who we are. Mathematics is in everything, in the way we spend money, in the time we dedicate to others, in the behavioral patterns we repeat without realizing it. Like footprints, these patterns reveal much more than we imagine. I knew I was on the right track. With every inch measured, I felt as if I were uncovering not only the crime scene, but also the mind of whoever masterminded it. And if the weight already revealed so much to me, the next detail, hidden among the marks, promised to be even more disturbing. It was when I examined the door that the mystery took on a new layer. The lock was intact, locked from the inside with no sign of tampering. It was as if the victim had died in a closed room, one of those classic enigmas that always challenge readers and investigators. The question burned in my mind: if the door was locked, how did the killer get out? There were no open windows, No secret passages visible. The scene screamed impossibility. The experts tried to explain it with weak hypotheses. Perhaps the victim had locked the door himself. Perhaps it was suicides. But none of it fit. The body told a different story. The scene breathed a different narrative. This detail reminded me of old cases in which criminals used ingenious tricks, such as invisible wires or improvised mechanisms to manipulate locks remotely. It was always impressive to see how the criminal mind reinvents itself to create the illusion of the impossible. In life, we also encounter locked doors, situations that seem to have no way out, financial problems, broken relationships, difficult decisions. We stare at the intact lock and think, there's no way to solve this. But as with criminal riddles, the solution rarely lies in the door itself, but rather in the different perspective we take on it. Creativity at this point is more valuable than any key. As I studied the doorknob, I realized the killer wanted exactly that, to trap me in an impossible dilemma. He knew that a locked door breeds despair, and that the mind, under pressure, accepts easy explanations. But I couldn't fall into that trap, because deep down, the real trick was still hidden, waiting to be uncovered. While reviewing old files from the local police station, I came across something that made my heart race. In 1920, in that same village, a mysterious crime had occurred with nearly identical characteristics: inverted footprints at the scene, a victim found under impossible circumstances, and a completely baffled investigator. The similarity was impossible to ignore. The chills ran down my spine, not from the novelty, but from the repetition. Was I facing a copycat or a macabre legacy? Leafing through the old reports, I realized that the case had never been solved. The killer from back then vanished like smoke, leaving only rumors and fear among the residents. Some said it was the work of a spirit. Others believed in a criminal mastermind who mocked justice. The fact is, the 1920 mystery loomed over the city like an unsolved shadow, and now it seemed to have resurfaced, like a scar that insists on bleeding again. This historical parallel made me reflect on how patterns repeat themselves in life. Sometimes we face problems that seem new, but are actually echoes of the past. A choice we leave unanswered, a mistake we don't correct, a habit we pretend not to notice. All of this returns in different forms, until we finally decide to face it head-on. And in this case, I had the chance to solve not only a current crime, but also a century-old ghost. It was inevitable to wonder, was I dealing with someone obsessed with reproducing that old case? A criminal fascinated by historical enigmas? Perhaps trying to surpass the original and leave his own mark? These questions led me to understand that the enemy I faced wasn't just seeking deception. He was seeking immortality. And if that was the game, the match was just beginning. It didn't take long for suspicion to fall on the victim's neighbor, a middle-aged man known for his gruff temper and the old boots he wore every day. To the local police, it seemed like an obvious connection. Old boots, mysterious footprints, proximity to the crime. It's curious how the human mind loves shortcuts, always seeking the most convenient explanation. But I had already learned that the most obvious culprits are almost never the real ones. They took the neighbor in for questioning, and while everyone waited for him to stumble over contradictions, I focused on the soles of his boots. I spent hours comparing the drawings, analyzing the wear, measuring even the smallest details. And there was the truth. The marks didn't match. The grooves were different. The pressure of his footsteps didn't match. The man, strange as he was, had nothing to do with those inverted footprints. This false lead made me reflect on our tendency to blame what's closest, most accessible. How often, when faced with a personal problem, do we point the finger at the first apparent cause? It's work's fault, it's luck's fault, it's so-and-so's fault. But often the real origin is hidden elsewhere, invisible to the hasty eye. It was precisely this error that nearly derailed the entire investigation. By clearing the neighbor, I realized that the real killer had calculated every detail, even creating an easy scapegoat to accuse. It was further proof of his manipulative mind. Someone who played not only with footprints but also with human emotions, fear, anger, rash judgment. And this only reinforced the certainty that the next step would be even more deceitful. It was when I decided to look beyond the footprints that my eyes caught sight of something even more disturbing. There, discreetly marked in the snow, was a small design, almost invisible to anyone not practiced in observing the detail. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a symbol, a simple line, yet charged with intention. It wasn't just a clue, it was a signature, a mark of authorship. Criminals like this aren't content to commit the act. They need to leave a trail of their vanity. The shape resembled an incomplete circle, intersected by a straight line. Throughout my career, I've encountered symbols all kinds: stars, numbers, initials. But this one in particular seemed charged with purpose, as if it were part of a larger code. Whoever left it wanted to be recognized, but not immediately understood. It was an enigmatic invitation, an intellectual challenge. It was like hearing someone whisper, "I was here, and you'll never forget." This detail made me think about how, in life, we also leave our invisible signatures. Whether in the way we speak, the choices we repeat, or the small gestures that become our trademark. Even without realizing it, we reveal who we are through symbols hidden in our daily lives. The criminal simply took this to an extreme level, transforming his ego into a code drawn on the cold floor. As I recorded that symbol, I felt myself becoming increasingly immersed in the killer's mind. The inverted footprints were already a challenge in themselves, but now there was more. A symbolic enigma, an invitation to a game of logic that transcended the physical and entered the psychological. And deep down, I knew that drawing was just the first piece of a much larger puzzle. Yet long before rumors began to circulate through the village's narrow streets, the victim, it seemed, was harboring more than just domestic secrets. Whispers swirled that he was involved in blackmail, perhaps targeting someone influential. This detail changed the entire weight of the case. After all, when a crime involves power, the shadows grow thicker and the stakes higher. It's not just a death, it's a message. During my discreet interviews, I heard truncated stories, half-truths that hid more than they revealed. One neighbor spoke of nocturnal encounters. Another mentioned mysterious letters. But no one had the courage to state anything clearly. Fear was present in every averted glance, in every prolonged silence. And this to me was the clearest sign that there was much more behind that death. This kind of conspiracy always makes me reflect on how the truth, when it threatens powerful interests, is often silenced. Not just in crimes, but in life in general. How many times have you noticed that the truth is more disturbing than lies? That revealing too much can be costly. This pattern is as old as the world, and it was etched right there in that village that pretended to ignore its own wound. By connecting this dot to the crime scene, I began to understand that the killer might not just be an individual obsessed with enigmas. He might be a tool, someone used to protect larger secrets. And if that were true, the enigma of the inverted footprints was just the surface of a much darker web. It was as I put the pieces together that an inevitable conclusion forced itself upon me. If the footprints seemed to be leading out but there were no signs of entry, then the truth was clear. The killer was already inside the house before the crime occurred. This realization changed the entire picture. What seemed like a puzzle of doors and tracks was, in fact, a ruse to hide the obvious. And ironically, the obvious is always the one that takes the longest to realize. I imagined a scene before the crime, the victim going about his ordinary life, unaware that danger was already lurking beneath the same roof. Perhaps he offered coffee to his own executioner, or shared trivial words without imagining they would be his last. This detail added a cruel layer to the case, the betrayal of trust, because when the enemy is already within, no locks or bolts can protect. This reasoning made me reflect on how, in life, we often seek external threats, when in fact the danger is already lurking right next to us. Problems don't arise out of nowhere. They grow within us or too close to us, until we decide to face them head-on. Just like this crime, ignoring what's inside the house is the mistake that paves the way for silent tragedies. As I stared again at the inverted footprints, I realized they weren't just a misdirection. They were a cruel reminder. Don't look outside for what's already too close. The killer hadn't just invaded the victim's life. He was already a part of it, and this revelation alone made the case even darker. And then, as if a curtain fell before my eyes, everything made sense. The inverted souls weren't just a curious detail. They were the central trick, the grand scheme. The killer wanted everyone to believe he was escaping, when in fact there was no escape. The victim hadn't been surprised by someone entering, but by someone already waiting for him. The ambush was engineered from within, and the carefully inverted footprints served to construct a convincing lie. This revelation brought me a mixture of frustration and admiration. frustration at how the team almost fell into the trap, but admiration for the criminal's cunning. Not just anyone would have the patience and composure to create such an illusion. This kind of ingenuity isn't born of haste, but of the vanity of those who want to be remembered as an above-average player. It was an intellectual trap, and I had been the chosen opponent. In life, we also encounter inverted footprints every day. Carefully crafted appearances to convince us we're seeing a way out, when in reality we're falling deeper into a trap. Toxic relationships, false opportunities, illusory promises. Everything seems true until we decide to look closely and realize the trail is upside down. With the revelation in hand, I realized I wasn't just facing a killer, but someone who turned crime into a spectacle. The inverted footprints were his theatrical signature, a clear message: don't underestimate my ability to deceive. And ironically, it was precisely in this excess of vanity that his mask began to crack. It was when I revisited the scene, with the revelation already in mind, that I noticed something almost invisible. Near the inverted footprints there was a subtle mark, a smaller trail, different in shape and pressure, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to the trained eye. That detail revealed what few imagined: the killer had not acted alone. There was an accomplice, someone who, in the shadows, had helped sustain the plot. This kind of discovery always changes the weight of the investigation. One ingenious criminal is already dangerous. Two, working together can create a web nearly impossible to unravel. Every step, every detail seemed calculated by four hands, as if a macabre symphony performed in harmony, and this explained why the scene seemed so perfect. It wasn't the work of one, but of a synchronized duo. In life, we also face invisible accomplices. Problems rarely come alone. They appear accompanied by hidden allies that strengthen their presence. A bad decision brings regret. A lie attracts more lies to support it. Just as in crime, the trails multiply, and we only realize too late that we are trapped in something bigger than we imagined. Noticing that second mark, I sensed the game was far from over. If there was an accomplice, it meant the puzzle wasn't just about individual vanity, but about an alliance built in secret. And criminal alliances, as in life, are always harder to dismantle. It was only when all the pieces were put together that the veil fell completely. The inverted footprints, which seemed to be the great mystery, were merely a trick of illusion. The real key was hidden in the house's architecture. A secret, nearly invisible entrance, used by the killer to come and go unnoticed. The inverted footprint had served only as a distraction, a smokescreen to divert everyone's attention from the true path. When I discovered the hidden passage, I felt that mixture of relief and unease that always accompanies final revelations. Relief at finally understanding the enigma, but unease at realizing the depth of the manipulation. This wasn't just a crime. It was a carefully directed piece of theater. The killer wanted not only to escape, but also to control every thought, every conclusion drawn. This climax made me reflect on how much, in our lives, we also allow ourselves to be deceived by distractions. How often do we chase the wrong path, investing energy in illusions, while the true answer lies hidden in a secret passage we ignore? Problems are often solved not by looking where everyone points, but by looking where no one dares to look. Seeing the secret entrance open before me, I understood that the killer had won the first part of the game, but not the end. Because by identifying the trick, I had dismantled his illusion. And deep down, that was what he feared, that someone would be able to see through the act. And if he had gotten this far, it was because the game was about to enter its most decisive chapter. And now I ask you, how many times have you followed tracks that seemed right but were actually just inverted footprints? How many times have you believed something because it seemed too logical, without realizing the truth was hidden right next door? This case teaches us that a keen eye is the best weapon against illusion in crime, and in life as well. What will you do from today onward to see beyond the obvious? Will you continue to accept ready-made explanations? Or will you challenge yourself to investigate deeper even when everything seems to be in order? Believe me, many of life's locked doors only open when we have the courage to look at the details no one else sees. I leave you with an invitation. Apply this logic to your routine. Analyze the trails you've been following. Question the stories you're told, and be wary of distractions. The true mystery lies not in what screams at you, but in what whispers in the silence. And who knows, this investigative approach may be the key to transforming your own paths. If this content made you think, comment below with your perspective on the case and what you would do if you were in my shoes. Oh, and don't forget, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and join me in each new investigation. Because the next enigma may be closer than you think,